You were taught that kindness is strength, that mercy earns loyalty, that if you extend your hand to an enemy, they will recognize your humanity and lower their blade. That is the lie they fed you. And right now, somewhere in your life, you are paying the price for believing it. A person you helped is now positioned above you. A competitor you showed grace to used that grace as a window to study you. Someone you forgave did not forgive you in return. They simply recalculated. Machiavelli watched this happen to princes, to generals, to men who built empires with their hands and lost them with their hearts. He sat in exile, broken, and he understood something that every warm, moralized, church-conditioned mind refuses to accept. Kindness shown to an enemy is not virtue. It is a slow surrender dressed in the costume of dignity. There are 5 specific mechanisms by which your mercy destroys you.
The 5th one will explain every major loss you have suffered that you still cannot make sense of. If you are not ready for this, close the video. Go back to the crowd. But if you want the truth, the cold, surgical, Machiavellian truth, stay exactly where you are. Phase 1. The anatomy of strategic mercy. Most men who show kindness to enemies are not being virtuous. They are being afraid. Understand this before anything else. When you offer mercy to someone who has moved against you, you tell yourself it is because you are the bigger person, because you have risen above the pettiness of conflict, because you are evolved. What you are actually doing is avoiding the confrontation that would expose how much power you do not have. The average man confuses appeasement with magnanimity. He confuses retreat with grace. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Most people hear this and recoil. They call it cynical.
What they refuse to see is the precision underneath it. Fear is reliable. Fear is consistent. Love is conditional, emotional, and revocable the moment your enemy believes you are no longer a threat. The psychological framework here is called intermittent reinforcement, studied extensively in behavioral psychology. When you intermittently reward an adversary, sometimes showing strength, sometimes showing kindness, you do not create confusion, you create appetite. They learn to probe. They learn that if they push far enough, eventually you will give. Your mercy becomes a variable reward schedule, and variable reward schedules are the most addictive and the most exploitable patterns in human behavior. Caesar understood this. His famous clemency, his policy of sparing defeated enemies, was not weakness. It was architecture. He granted mercy from a position of absolute dominance, when the cost of defiance was certain death. He showed mercy only after the example had already been made. That sequence matters. First the sword, then the open hand. The moment men believed his kindness was inherent rather than calculated, they gathered in the Senate with their blades. Your practical instruction for this phase is simple. The next time you feel the impulse to soften towards someone who has moved against you, stop. Sit with that impulse for 60 seconds and ask yourself one question. Does this act of kindness come from a position of overwhelming strength, or does it come from fear of further conflict? If you cannot answer honestly and immediately, you already know the answer. And if you think that was uncomfortable, what comes next will be worse. Phase 2.
the signal you do not know you are sending. Every act of mercy toward an enemy is a transmission, and the message it sends is not what you intend. You believe you are signaling, "I am above this. I am civilized. I am large enough to let this go." What your enemy receives is entirely different.
What they receive is, "I am not willing to pay the cost of full conflict," which means there is a ceiling to what I will do, which means there is a threshold I will not cross. And now I know where that threshold is. Robert Greene documented this in the 48 Laws of Power, Law 15. Crush your enemy totally. Greene writes that a partially crushed enemy is an ember you have left alive in the ashes. Given any air, any time, any resource, it reignites. Not with the same intensity, with twice the intention, because now it has a reason. The 99% of people who cannot apply this principle make the same error. They believe conflict has a finish line. They believe that if they stop fighting and extend grace, the other party will recognize the truce and honor it. But this assumes your enemy operates from the same moral framework you do. They do not. They operate from their own calculus of survival and advantage. Joe Navarro, the former FBI behavioral analyst and author of What Everybody is Saying, has documented how predatory personalities, whether in boardrooms or back alleys, specifically probe for behavioral thresholds. They test what you will accept, then they push past it, then they test again. Your forgiveness is not received as noble, it is received as data. Napoleon understood the signal. After Austerlitz, when he had destroyed the combined forces of Austria and Russia, he did not send wine and condolences to the losing commanders. He restructured the map of Europe. He did not give back what he had taken to appear generous. His enemies respected him when they feared him. The moment he was perceived as weakening, at Leipzig, at Waterloo, they did not respond with the same mercy he had never shown. They converged. Here is your instruction. Stop explaining your decisions to adversaries. Stop justifying. Stop contextualizing. The explanation itself is the signal of weakness. When you feel the urge to say, "I'm doing this because," to someone who has moved against you, go silent. Silence from strength is a fortress. Explanation from fear is an open gate. Are you still here? Good. The fragile ones already left. Comment below. I choose the cold path. Phase 3. What Machiavelli actually said about enemies. You were brainwashed to believe that turning the other cheek is moral evolution, that the spiritually advanced person absorbs hostility and transforms it through love. You were taught this in church, reinforced in school, repeated in every piece of popular media produced for mass consumption. It served those in power perfectly, because a population that absorbs hostility without retaliation is a population that is permanently, structurally manageable. Machiavelli saw this clearly from the outside. He was not immoral. He was simply unbothered by comfortable lies. In the Discourses on Livy, he wrote that men must be either caressed or annihilated, because they will revenge themselves for small injuries but cannot do so for great ones. Read that again. Small injuries invite revenge. Great ones prevent it. The lesson is not to be cruel. The lesson is that half measures are uniquely dangerous because they produce enemies who are motivated but still capable. Cosimo de Medici, the architect of Florentine banking power, did not survive his rivals through warmth.
He survived through a kind of invisible severity, appearing generous in public, keeping meticulous records of who had moved against him in private, and waiting. He understood that time deployed with intention is itself a weapon. He never rushed to punish. He simply never forgot. And when the moment arrived, the correction was total and permanent.
The psychological concept here is what researchers call the fundamental attribution error, the human tendency to attribute one's own behavior to circumstances while attributing others' behavior to character. Your enemy does not believe they are your enemy. They believe they are responding to circumstances you created. This means they do not feel they owe you mercy in return. They feel justified. Your kindness will not correct their internal narrative. It will simply give them space to refine it. Your instruction. Identify one person in your current life, professional, personal, or social, who has moved against you and toward whom you have been consistently gentle. Map the history of their behavior before and after each act of kindness. Do not lie to yourself about the pattern. The pattern will be clear. And once you see it, you will understand that the kindness was not making things better. It was delaying an inevitable correction while allowing the damage to compound. What does it cost you when you finally stop denying the pattern? Hold that question, because the next phase is about the cost. Phase 4. The compounding price of delayed action. Every day you extend grace to an enemy is a day you are funding their next move against you. Time, positioning, information, relationships. Every one of these accrues. While you are deciding whether to be generous, they are deciding how to use the window you have opened. This is not paranoia. This is mechanics. The 33 Strategies of War, also by Robert Greene, dedicates an entire chapter to what he calls the guerrilla war of the mind strategy. The understanding that wars are rarely won on the battlefield. They are won in the long, quiet accumulation of advantage before the battle ever begins. Attachment theory, originally developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by researchers like Mary Main, maps what happens when a person receives inconsistent responses from a source of power or authority. The result is what psychologists call anxious ambivalent attachment. But here's what no one tells you. This same pattern, when applied strategically, does not create loyalty. It creates obsession and tactical calculation. Your enemy is not loyal to you because you showed them mercy. They are obsessed with decoding you because your mercy was followed by nothing. They are running your pattern, trying to find the edge. King Philip IV of France understood the compounding mathematics of delayed action. When he moved against the Knights Templar in 1307, the order had spent decades accumulating wealth, influence, and a network that spanned Europe. Philip did not negotiate. He did not extend offers of reduced power. He moved once, completely, and simultaneously across the entire geography of the order. The result was total. Had he hesitated, had he shown the kind of measured mercy that allows a wounded structure to regroup, the outcome would have been a war he likely could not have won. Your instruction. Draw a line. Not publicly, not dramatically. Internally. In the architecture of your own decision-making. Stop extending credit to people who have already demonstrated that they will spend it against you. This is not hatred. Hatred is warm. Hatred is emotional. What you are building here is colder than that. It is clarity. The kind of clarity that has no interest in revenge, but also has no tolerance for continued erosion.
What is the last thing you gave someone who had already shown you exactly who they were? And what did it cost you? You know the answer. That is why you are still watching. Phase 5. The Sovereign Calculus. When mercy actually serves you. Machiavelli was not a monster. He was a surgeon. And the most dangerous misreading of his work is the belief that severity is the default setting of the powerful. It is not.
The true Machiavellian insight is this: mercy, like every other tool, must be deployed from a position of unquestioned dominance, and only when it serves a strategic purpose. Not to make you feel good, not to make others like you, only when it sends a message that consolidates your position. There are 3 conditions under which extending grace to an enemy is strategically sound. First, when the demonstration of mercy is more devastating to their pride and positioning than punishment would be. The magnanimity of the truly powerful is a form of humiliation, because it makes clear that you considered them and found them unworthy of even a forceful response. Second, when the mercy creates a visible public narrative that you control. Third, when the enemy in question can be more useful neutralized into an ally than destroyed. Outside of these conditions, mercy toward an enemy is not virtue. It is structural decay. And you have been trained your entire life to mistake structural decay for spiritual evolution. The men who changed history were not warm. They were precise. Their restraint was not the restraint of someone who lacked the capacity for severity. It was the restraint of someone who understood that every action is a signal. Every signal accumulates into a reputation, and reputation is the fortress from which all power is ultimately projected. What reputation are you currently building? And does the version of you that extends mercy again and again to the same adversaries belong inside that fortress? Or are they the ones who built the door to let the enemy in? Here's the part they never put in the self-help books. This path is cold. If you walk it with full commitment, there will be rooms where you are the only person in them. There will be relationships you do not pursue because you see the calculus clearly and the math does not hold. There will be moments of grace you do not extend, not because you are incapable of it, but because you are no longer willing to pay the price of misplaced softness. You will be called cold. You will be called calculating by people who have never built anything, who have never been stripped of something they built and had to rebuild it from nothing. Machiavelli wrote The Prince at 54 years old. He had been arrested. He had been tortured on the Strappado, 4 dislocations of the shoulder in a single session. He had been exiled from the city he loved and had served for nearly 2 decades. He had nothing left but clarity. And from that exile, from that stripped-down fortress of a mind that had lost everything warm and comfortable about its former life, he wrote a document that has outlasted every government, every institution, and every comfortable man who ever dismissed him as a cynic. That is the paradox of the cold path. The wolf does not mourn the warmth of the flock. The wolf is not without feeling. The wolf simply knows what it is, and knowing what you are, precisely, without illusion, without the flattering fog of self-deception, is the only freedom that cannot be taken from you. This freedom is cold, but it is the only freedom that is truly yours. You made it to the end. That already separates you from the majority of people who encountered this video and could not hold the discomfort long enough to finish it. Most people want their philosophy warm. They want it wrapped in reassurance.
They want to be told that the world rewards the gentle and that systems are ultimately fair and that if you are kind enough, consistently enough, the universe will return it. You are not most people. You already knew something was wrong with that story. That is why you are here. That is why you stayed. Subscribe not because I asked you to. Subscribe because you are done being the person who shows mercy from a position of fear and calls it virtue.
Subscribe because you are building something, slowly, silently, with a kind of precision that does not require an audience. What I say publicly is already more than most men can hold. What I cannot say publicly, the deeper mechanics, the specific plays, the unfiltered analysis of power as it actually operates, that belongs to a different room, a smaller one. The door is open, but only for the ones who have already decided. You know who you are.